So I've owned Petrobras for coming up on 2 years now, and I wanted to give kind of an update on my total return after 2 years of holding this dividend stock. As some of you might know, this specific stock is fairly controversial, and as of about 2020, it's had quite the journey as far as how much it's been paying in dividends, as well as its fluctuating share price. And over the years, I've heard a lot of different opinions about PBR, including some thoughts from people who actually live in Brazil and are even more familiar with the company than the average investor. On one side, you've got people that are either from or live in Brazil that say that Petrobras is an amazing company with great management and extremely loyal employees who have a positive long-term outlook on the company and are also very committed to their jobs and just have a lot of trust in the company. And then on the other side, there are people who are from Brazil that say that it's not really a company to be investing in because it's partially owned by the government, and Brazil often elects corrupt leaders in the government that could limit the growth and profitability of Petrobras. So as someone who has owned the stock for almost 2 years now, I wanted to give kind of my own perspective and experience as well as how much I've made since owning the stock. So jumping into my own position, and right out of the gate, I own PBR.A, which is the preferred shares of Petrobras, and the preferred shares do not give you voting rights, but typically pay a little bit higher of a dividend. And right now I own 211.5 shares, or a market value of just over $2,900. And starting with the capital return, so the amount that I've made not including dividends, this is just the difference of the price I paid for the stock versus what it's worth now. And that's a dollar amount of over $800, or about a 40% return. And of course, these numbers here are not fixed. They can change by the day. So that being said, let's check out the dividends I've received from Petrobras since I first bought. So I owned PBR a few months before September 2022. And at the time I only owned about 10 shares. So my first dividend payment ever was $11.28 in September 2022. Then as the months went on, you can notice that these dividend payments are getting bigger and bigger, because at one point I owned over $10,000 worth of PBR around the beginning of 2023. And I actually made a video about it, I think a year ago, that you can go watch. So I took a pretty big risk with the stock at one point, and it paid off, as you can see, pretty well. There were multiple dividend payments over $300, and eventually, as time went on, you can notice that the dividend payments went down a little bit. That's because I sold a majority of the shares to move the profits into other stocks in the portfolio. So the dividend payments have been a lot less ever since. But now, to this day, every quarter I hold on to these 200 shares, the dividend paychecks range anywhere from $40 to $60. So the total amount I've received in dividends, not including the upcoming dividend paychecks I'm expected to get later this summer, comes out to $1,709.64. And if you include the roughly $800 I've made from my capital return, that's a total return amount of over $2,500. And my average cost on this position is fairly low because I did start buying in about 2 years ago when the price was around $8 to $10. And the dividend yield back then was even more attractive because at one point it was up to almost 90%. And that was largely because the stock price was so low at the time, but the company was just crushing earnings, which allowed it to pay out such massive dividends. And even as of today, the dividend is around 18.5%, which is still considered extremely high for a dividend stock. But a lot of that is due to the fact that the company is still producing extremely high profit margins, as well as a ton of consistent free cash flow. So although the stock can be considered controversial and fairly risky, it's one that, in my personal experience, has paid off extremely well. And along with that, I do plan on holding the stock for at least 5 more years, because in my opinion, it's a great tool to help fund my other long-term investments. I also do reinvest the dividends back into PBR every once in a while, but for the most part, I just use the dividends to invest in my other positions. So I don't have any reason to sell anytime soon, but let me know what you guys think of PBR and if you think it's worth it to hold in your own portfolio, or if it's one that you're completely staying away from. I'm not sure, but I think this video might be a little bit shorter than normal. As you can see, in the background, I'm not in my regular office today. We're actually moving into a new house in a couple of days, so wish me luck, and I'll see you guys next time.